Well, greetings, vinyl community. I thought it was time to do a vinyl finds video. And by finds, I mean items that I found on my doorstep, because what with the current situation, there hasn't been any possibility to visit physical record stores. So these are all items that have winged their way to me. Starting off with the jazz world, Max Roach on Impulse, the Percussion Bittersweet. This is from 1961 and features a wonderful cast of musicians. Eric Dolphy, first and foremost on alto sax, bass clarinet, and flute. He's got Booker Little on trumpet, Julian Priester on trombone, Clifford Jordan on tenor sax, Mal Waldron on piano, Art Davis on bass, and his future wife, Abby Lincoln, on vocals on 2 tracks. Don't need to say much more about that. Great album from Max Roach. On the Blue Note Tone Poet series, Lou Donaldson, Mr. Shingling. This is the follow-up to Alligator Bagaloo. Some just good funky soul jazz featuring Lonnie Smith on the organ. Lou Donaldson on alto, of course, Blue Mitchell on trumpet. It does a version of Ode to Billy Joe, a version of The Shadow of Your Smile. So it's got that pop, soul jazz aspect to it, and I love the contribution of the funky organ from Dr. Lonnie Smith. Some fusion from 2/5 of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, the original Mahavishnu Orchestra, Jerry Goodman and Jan Hammer. This is from 1974, Like Children, on the Nemperor label. Interesting inner sleeve. Interesting label because they use different colored labels for side 1 and side 2. Musically, it's got some fantastic keyboard playing. Jan Hammer's synthesizer work is just brilliant. Blends very well with Jerry Goodman's violin. Unfortunately, there are vocals, and the vocals are awful, and the lyrics are awful. So not all the tracks are so afflicted, but it really does bring down the album, which does have some really, really good musical content, but could have been so much better if Goodman and Hammer had kept their mouths shut. Shut up and play your synthesizer and your violin, folks. This was an interesting experience on eBay. I ordered this album, Flutes. It's a split album. Sam Rivers and James Newton sharing the album, not playing together, but splitting the sides of the album. And the Sam Rivers group is his tuba trio. So Sam Rivers on flute, Joe Daly on tuba and French horn, and Warren Smith on drums. And the James Newton portion is solo flute. So when I received this album, I hadn't looked at the listing on eBay carefully enough. It contained the wrong record. Now the label looked like the right record. It was another record featuring the Sam Rivers tuba trio on the same label, Circle Records from Germany. But it was a different split album that I received. So I wrote to the seller and asked, by any chance, this is a fine album, but it's not the right record. Do you have the right record somewhere, maybe in the other cover? And I sent a picture of what that cover looked like. So she looked around, and sure enough, she found the record and was going to send me the correct disc. And then she looked around some more and separately found the cover that goes with the album that I received. So I ended up being able to recreate this album as well, Jazz of the 70s, with the Sam Rivers tuba trio and the Earl Cross Sextet. And I know nothing about the Earl Cross Sextet, except that he has Ronnie Boykins, well known from the Sun Ra Orchestra on bass, as well as Juma Sultan on bass. So both very nice bits of free jazz, but maybe not quite as free as Spontaneous Music Ensemble or Spontaneous Music Orchestra, as usual led by John Stevens, but he's got a huge host of musicians, including a lot of luminaries of the free jazz scene from Britain, Evan Parker, Trevor Watts, a lot of folks I'm not so familiar with, but they do combine to make a very fine noise. My battery light is blinking, so I think it's time for me to do an edit, so I will be right back. Okay, moving on to the rock side of things. The Worst of Jefferson Airplane from 1970. This was released during a fallow period for the Jefferson Airplane. There was a long gap between their fifth and sixth studio albums, during which they made some lineup changes, getting a new drummer, losing one of their main singers, adding violin, and forming their own record label. So as a stopgap, this came out late in 1970 with this really nice sort of retro salute to their record label, with whom they always had a very contentious relationship. Great label and antique notes on the inner sleeve, listings of opera recordings, and the cover itself has this nice texture, like a leather-bound book. Really nice package. The selection is music from all of those first 5 studio albums, plus the live Bless Its Pointed Little Head. And that includes, of course, the biggest hits, Somebody to Love, White Rabbit, and some deeper tracks, like Ballad of You and Me and Puniel from After Bathing at Baxter's, and the odd little percussion and electronics piece, Chushingura, from Crown of Creation. That's a nice inclusion, as is the lovely folk ballad Good Shepherd from Volunteers. That's an unexpected inclusion on a greatest hits or worst of type album. Oh, and the other thing that was going on during this period was Paul Kantner and Grace Slick were doing the Blows Against the Empire album. So that was another reason why there was not a lot of activity on the mothership front, so to speak, the airship front. From 1971, Welcome to the Canteen by Traffic in All But Name. And in fact, this copy is the label variation that credits on the label Traffic, etc. underneath all the individual names. Other copies do not have that credit. It just shows the individual names. This is a live album featuring the 4 original members of Traffic, for the first time augmented by Rick Gretsch, Rebop Kwakuba, and Jim Gordon. So this is before the Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys, featuring that augmented version of the band. So they're just doing older Traffic material, Dave Mason's solo material, Sad and Deep as You, and Shouldn't Have Took More Than You Gave, both from his wonderful Alone Together LP. And capping it all off with Gimme Some Lovin' from the Spencer Davis Group days. Not the greatest cover art in the world, but really enjoyable album. I like this one. Another live one by a classic rock band from the 70s this time. Well, that was from the 70s, just doing a lot of 60s material in there. Genesis Seconds Out. This is the current reissue pressing. Very heavy vinyl. I picked this up having read a lot of positive things about the quality of this pressing. And it is a very fine pressing. The various members collaged around, including Bill Bruford, who's only on a couple of the tracks. Most of this being from the period with Chester Thompson on drums. Entering the world of the Fabs, George Harrison, Electronic Sound. This is an extremely experimental and abstract piece of music or sound, as the very title acknowledges that it's not music in any conventional sense. And in fact, one side of this was Bernie Krause demonstrating the workings of the Moog synthesizer to George Harrison, who was purchasing one. The use of this demo without Bernie Krause's permission did not go over very well with Bernie Krause, who says that he intended to use some of the ideas that he had demoed on a future Beaver and Krause album. It's a little confusing exactly what part is the demo, because apparently on this US version of the album, the track titles, and there are only 2 tracks, both side-long tracks, Under the Mersey Wall and No Time or Space, they are mislabeled on this pressing, so apparently they are the reverse of what they are. And this was the track Under the Mersey Wall, which actually, if I understand correctly, is the track that I think contains some more interesting ideas, but is not the demo with Bernie Krause. That was recorded at Esher in Merry England with the assistance of Rupert and Jostick, the Siamese twins. I always thought that was just sort of a nonsense credit. Kind of reminded me the Rupert and Jostick of John and Yoko, maybe. I don't know why I make that association. It turns out that's a reference to George Harrison's Siamese cats. No Time or Space, the other track, recorded in California with Bernie Krause. And apparently there are a lot of secret clues in the very childlike artwork by George Harrison, including Eric Clapton. Apparently that's Mal Evans. I think that's Derek Taylor. And those guys, you can figure out which one is which. I don't know. And we hear George Harrison's It's All Too Much from the Beatles' Yellow Submarine soundtrack, covered on Steve Hillage's second solo album, L. Steve Hillage from Gong. This actually starts off with another 60s cover, Hurdy-Gurdy Man by Donovan, nicely and psychedelically arranged by Steve Hillage for his backup band, which is Todd Rundgren and Utopia, Todd Rundgren having produced this album. Side 1 consists of Hurdy-Gurdy Man, followed by the instrumental Hurdy-Gurdy Glissando, and a Steve Hillage original Electric Gypsies capping it off. Side 2 is an Indian-styled piece, Om Namah Shivaya, which is very beautiful, followed by a lengthy, very progressive and jazz-inflected Lunar Music Suite with Don Cherry guesting on trumpet, and then it all ends with It's All Too Much. Very pleasant album. Steve Hillage just makes music with a nice attitude. It's fun prog. Little on the darker side from that then is music of Art Zoid from France. This is from 1980-something, 83. Les Espaces Inquiets, the Unquiet Spaces. And the cover might look a little disturbing, this sort of odd picture of these Roman soldiers who are marionettes with strings controlling them, but I don't know if it's going to come through in the video. If you look closely, they've all got goofy faces and look like something out of Asterix and Obelix, the European comic. This is chamber prog, chamber music influence. The instrumentation is piano, viola / violin, saxophone, trumpet, a lot of squealing trumpet just over the top, and Terry Zabwatsev on bass, cello, guitars, voices, tapes, synthesizer, and a lot of incidental percussion. There's a lot of very insistent rhythms going on with the sawing violins and squealing trumpet going over the top of it. And also by Art Zoid, the subsequent album Le Mariage du Ciel et de l'Enfer, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Ballet by Roland Petit, who also worked with Pink Floyd. An interesting package. This is a sort of like an obi, fits over the main cover, which is this. Great deal in the same vein as the previous album, but with a reduced lineup without the saxophone, and a bit more electronic. In particular, there's the sound of children laughing, which is sort of a leitmotif on the album. It's an interesting little sample that pops up repeatedly in different pieces, and I like the way it ties things together. Be right back. I forgot to mention when showing the Traffic album, or Traffic / Steve Winwood and etc., that the music playing in the background is also Steve Winwood related. It's the Ayi Keta by Remy Kabaka with Abdul Lassisi Amau and Steve Winwood. That's not new, it's just what's in the background. Okay, Italian progressive fusion band Area, and their 5th album, I believe, Maledetti, from 1975, I think. Does it say here? This is on the Cramps label, and I had a friend who ran a record store where I used to, 1976, there it is, a friend who ran a record store that I used to haunt, and he was fooled by one of these records on the Cramps label. He saw the Cramps, he saw their logo of the Frankenstein monster, he associated it with the Cramps, who of course are themselves associated with horror movies and such. So when he heard fusion prog rock from that label, he was very disappointed. But this is very much in that prog rock fusion, and even a bit of classical. There's a little takeoff on one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos on here. But the signature sound is the vocals of Demetrios Stratos, which are very distinctive, and in particular, he yodels. He yodels a lot, and it is something that their music is designed to fit with. Really a distinctive sound. A lot more calming in the vocal department, Fuji Yuki, Orient. I do not know anything about her. This is very meditative, entrancing. It was compared to Jong Yoon, who sang with Popol Vuh on some of their early albums, and I thought that was a good comparison. This is just a really nice, relaxing, kind of avant-garde / new age vocal From Roxy Music, Andy McKay and his first solo album from 1974, In Search of Eddie Riff. This is the first pressing. When this album was reissued a couple of years after the initial release, or repressed after the initial release, they changed the track listing fairly drastically. This version of the album includes 2 vocal tracks. Those were both removed from the second edition, and some instrumentals added. A version of Wild Weekend by the Rebel Rousers, Rockin' Rebels, one of those, was added, previously released as a single. It was made the lead-off track on this. On this version, the lead-off track is an instrumental version of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. So you know that this is really varied in its scope when it does Wagner, and that can be replaced by an old early 60s rock and roll instrumental. Another track that was added to the revised version was a cover of the Beatles' Long and Winding Road. This version, in addition to some originals, it's about half originals. The covers besides Ride of the Valkyries, we get The End of the World, as in Don't You Know It's the End of the World, What Becomes of the Broken Hearted, and A Four-Legged Friend. That's one of the vocal pieces. Begins with Wagner, ends with Schubert. But don't expect straight classical readings. He very much brings the King Curtis-influenced saxophone sound to those. More of that European rock in opposition type stuff, Étant fou les loups blancs. This is their album Les Trois Fous. Les Trois Fous, Père Gagnant au Pays des. I don't know. Picked this one up because it was pointed out to me that I did not already own this. I thought I had it on a CD compilation, which in fact I don't own. But there was a post on Facebook by Steve Feigenbaum, whom I mentioned in my previous video of 5 Steves, that told a story about this album where he had gone to see one of the rare U.S. performances by Henry Cow, and Étant Fou was the opening band, and he was kind of going in with a feeling of resentment that he was going to have to sit through this other band that he hadn't heard of in order to get to the Henry Cow portion of the show. And in fact, Étant Fou blew him away. And they did material that was going to be on this album, which hadn't been released yet. So it was one that he scooped up very avidly when it was released. And that was his cautionary tale not to dismiss an experience that you're not expecting to be that great. From Germany, some krautrock by Guru Hinton. This is the current reissue by Make Noise. No, Play Loud. I'm thinking of the synthesizer components. Play Loud, but on the Or label. Nice red vinyl. And this is very wacky, jammy krautrock, featuring Monty Neumeier's great guitar, but just some insane and goofy vocal interjections throughout. Very psychedelic, druggy, and fun. Also from Germany, Harmonia, the offshoot of Cluster, and their album Deluxe. And this is the opposite. This is more relaxed, and it does have a beat, that motoric krautrock beat, but it's on the gentle electronic side. That one. Artist I had not heard of before, seeing something that made me look into this album. Merit Hemingway from Sweden. She is an organist and does music based on Swedish folk, but adds a lot of instruments on here, so it's really a prog rock sort of approach, but with a Swedish folk bass. So it's pretty interesting. And Trollskog, I don't know how to pronounce that. It does have something to do with trolls. There's a troll painting on the inside there. Excuse me. Voice is going, but I'm almost done. Magma on a D, a collection of rarities from the late 70s. On the Tapioca label, and look at that extremely professional lettering. I mentioned Popol Vuh earlier. Here's their album from 1978, Brüder des Schattens, Söhne des Lichts, Brothers of Shadow, Sons of Light. And this features the main man, Florian Fricke, on piano, and Daniel Fischelcher, who was his most, I think, faithful bandmate in the ever-changing Popol Vuh lineup, which was always very minimal, on guitar. Alois Gromer on sitar, Bob Ilescu on oboe, and Ted de Jong on tambura, plus church choir. And like the Fujiyuki album, very meditative and soft. And this is music associated with the soundtrack that Florian Fricke did for the Werner Herzog remake of Nosferatu. It's tricky because there was actually an official soundtrack album to Nosferatu, and that album and this album have been combined on various reissues. Brand new album from Kavus Torabi, founder of the really superb current prog band Knife World, and now the leader of the current incarnation of Gong. Great guitarist, interesting songwriter. This is rather meditative itself. A lot of the songs have to do with leaving one's body. Interesting listen. I would recommend that one. And finally, something different from all of the above or the below. I just recently read a book about the ESP Records label, and it's not the easiest thing to pick up a lot of ESP's vintage titles, but I found this one, The Coach with the Six Insides, which is a recorded version of a stage play based on James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. The voice is going again. The production values are not great, but I'll always go for anybody speaking the words of Finnegan's Wake out loud, so this was pretty cool. It was sold as a sealed copy. Unfortunately, it was a reseal. You could tell that the disc itself was not new. It had fingerprints and even a scratch on it. And there's supposed to be a booklet of some kind in here, but I did not get that. Still, I got it cheap, so I didn't complain. And that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Yes, I am promoting myself shirt-wise. The hip crime vocab. Commit one today. Thank you very much for watching. Be well, and I'll talk with you again soon if my voice holds out. Bye-bye for now.